Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's THEWFIA.org, and become a member today.
Welcome, everybody, to PWZ, the Pro Wrestle Zone. Today, I have a very special guest. I know you've heard me ramble about the WFIA, the Wrestling Fans International Association. Okay. And today, I have a very special guest in their executive director, Brad Jake, with me. Brad, how's it going?
Going good, Rick. I don't know how special I am, but thank you for having me on today. I'm a big fan of you and your show, and I appreciate what you do for wrestling. In fact, we were just talking before the camera went on how much I appreciated Rick's Wendell Cooley interview. Yeah. I thought it went really well. So what you do is really good, and it's important for wrestling, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And, it's been a long road. It's been a lot of fun, and I do things almost daily. So, that's something in itself. It just keeps me very busy on top of all the work I do around here. So we're not here about me. We're here to talk about Brad Drake and the WFIA. So tell me about yourself. I know you were involved in the professional wrestling world to some extent as a youngster.
I was. It's a pretty interesting story. About 23 years ago, I was in the Army Reserve, and I had just finished basic training. I grew up a wrestling fan, like anybody, kind of fell off in the early 90s, got back into it in the mid-90s with the rise of the NWO. I think all of us between the ages of 40 and 50 did that just about. And I remember I got home from basic training. I'd graduated basic training, and it was like my first night home. And my brother goes, "Hey, we're going to go to this wrestling show." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I go, "The WWF doesn't come around till the day after Christmas." And he goes, No. He goes, we're going to go to this small show. So he takes me to this independent show. And it was really the first independent show I'd ever been to. We might have gone to something at a college or something when I was a kid, but it was a group called the LWF. And today, a lot of people have heard of the LWF in suburban Chicago because that's the promotion that CM Punk came out of originally. Right. And so my brother and I went to the show. My brother Jeff had graduated, was either close to graduating or had graduated college at that point, and a guy that he went to school with was wrestling for the LWF. So right after that, I was hooked with independent wrestling immediately. So that was December of 2000. Now, the state of Illinois had a boxing and wrestling commission at that point, and I was going to do a little bit of research before I came on here, but I forgot. I can't remember if they dropped the wrestling portion of the commission in January of 2002 or if it was in late 2001. So when we went to that show, things were still regulated. You had to have a promoter's license. And if I remember correctly, there was only like 5 promotions in the state of Illinois. It was something like, I remember talking to people about it. It was something like $3,500 or $5,000 just to apply for a promoter's license. So you really, in Illinois at that time, you only had like 5 promotions that were running shows. So independent shows, ran on the weekends, the promotions ran, but they would also, they wouldn't compete against each other. Mm-hmm. And they also would not let their talent work for each other. So if you were an LWF guy, you couldn't work for Windy City. If you were a Windy City guy, you couldn't work for PCW. It was really interesting, but then they wouldn't run against each other either. So here I am, this young 19-year-old guy, And this was the wrestling world, the independent world that I came into. There was a lot of names back then that went on to do big things. So how I directly got involved was I started like a news website, and I was traveling the shows and I was taking pictures and I was doing interviews and stuff like that. I was getting to know everybody. I was starting to become friendly with all the promoters, the promotions, as much as you could, because things were still pretty closed back then. Because remember, you only had 5 or 6 promotions with licenses, right? And a lot of these were holdovers from the 70s and 80s. You know, kayfabe to an extent was still existent. You weren't just going to go hang out in somebody's locker room, right? You had to get invited. You had to talk, to know the right people. So that was kind of my in with wrestling. So at that time period, and again, we're talking 20 years ago, I'm trying to remember, I'm only like 5'7". I'm probably in pretty good shape now. I'm probably 200 pounds. Back then I was probably 150, 160, right? You get older, you put on weight. And my brother is kind of a freak of nature. He's like 5'9", and at his biggest, he was every bit of 240, 250, built like a freight train. So my brother was already training, right? And he was a natural, a very good athlete. He was a fullback in college, very good natural athlete. So LWF opened up a training school, and they had tryouts. It was a 2-day tryout for their training school. So I went to the tryout. There was like 50 of us there. And they only kept, I want to say, Rick, it was like 8 or 10 guys they kept. And I was one of the ones that they kept. I was a pretty good natural athlete myself. I was, a wrestler. I was a gymnast, that kind of stuff. But again, I'm a small guy, right? So I was lucky enough to get kept. And I trained with these other guys with the LWF. It's hard to remember. I think it was like almost a full year that I trained with them. And we kept going through different trainers. So it was like you would get comfortable with somebody, and then somebody else would come in and like change everything you were doing. And one of the funniest things I remember with this training was our first trainer's like, stay out of everybody's way at shows, leave everybody alone, don't talk to anybody, just do what you're supposed to do. Because we were responsible for the cleanup, breakdowns of all the shows, the setups, everything, right? It was free labor. You were indenture, but that's part of breaking in,
paying your dues.
Yes, that's part of breaking into pro wrestling. So it was no problem. And so we get this first trainer, like the first three months, is like, don't talk to anybody, and all of a sudden we get this new trainer that replaces that guy, and then we're getting chewed out about why we didn't introduce ourselves to people, that kind of stuff. So you start learning the inner workings of wrestling, right? I'm not going to knock anybody with the LWF. I can't, because everybody was fair and nice to me. But the quality at the training at that time just kept, like I said, it was like too many different hands in the pie, too many different styles. And frankly, you'd get pretty confused, right, at what to do. So I trained with them for like 9 months, maybe I think it was closer to a year. And our training was always really easy. It was on like Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights. Sometimes we do 2 nights a week, sometimes we do 3 nights a week, that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, they changed our training over to like Saturdays and Sundays. And that was fine for the most part. But again, I was in the reserve, right? I couldn't miss my reserve weekend to go train to be a pro wrestler. That wasn't going to fly, right? So I ended up having to stop training with them. I knew enough to work a match, that kind of stuff. I always carried a bag with some gear just in case if something happened. And then my brother kept on with his training. He was kind of a natural in it. And then we started going to all the local shows. And, my brother would work matches. I started picking up stuff as a commentator, as a ring announcer. I was a really good ring announcer. It was fun. So we were traveling around the Midwest every weekend. There was an upstart promotion. They dropped the promoter's license requirement in Illinois. Like I said, I think January of 2002, and all of a sudden all these promotions sprung up, right? But all the old promotions still kept their rules of segregation. Nobody could work with each other, right? And then they were like controlling their guys where they could work. So at first it was they couldn't work anywhere with any other promotion. And then it became, well, as long as it was outside of the Chicago area, it was okay. So again, I think I'm like 20 at this time, made a lot of connections. We know a lot of people in wrestling. My brother and I were traveling every weekend, going to different places, doing shows. We make some really, really tight, really good friends. And all of a sudden we're driving to a show one night and it hits me. And I go, we should do a super show. We should do a tournament. We should get all these promotions in Chicago that don't work with each other. We should run our own super show and do a one-night tournament, like a best of the Chicago area. So I came up with the idea of calling it the Interstate 8 Tournament of Champions. So back then, you had the Super 8, you had the best of the best, that kind of stuff was going on. Tournaments were kind of the thing in the
Super
early.
Super 8 still exists.
Exactly.
Super 8 still
Exactly.
Exists. Yeah. Yep.
But it was, if you remember, it was like the thing in the early 2000s. PWI would have pictures on it. So I'm like, we're going to do our own for the Midwest,
Yeah.
So everybody right off the bat goes, you guys are nuts. None of these promoters are going to go for this, right? And I'm 20, my brother's 23, but we've made all these connections. We've made all these friendships. This is before texting. This is really before even AOL Instant Messenger.
Social media.
Yeah.
All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. This was when you had to pick the phone up and call people. I can remember having to page people. That's how long ago this was, right? So this same time period, Rick, it's funny how things start clicking into place. There was a meathead gym that was in my town, and I got real interested in amateur bodybuilding and that kind of stuff. So I started putting in a lot of time at this meathead gym. And wouldn't you know it, that meathead gym was the same place that all the big time independent wrestlers hung out at. So I'm lifting every day with these guys, and I got to meet, now check out some of these names because you're going to know them. I got to meet these guys and form friendships with them through this gym. Ice Pick Vic Capri. Vic's out there. He's still working.
Yep.
Terrific guy. That's how I got to meet Ace Steel for the first time. Ace, again, I can't say enough great things about him. Great guy, genius when it comes to wrestling. Brilliant.
Absolutely. Yes.
CM Punk started hanging out at this gym working out. We all know what happened with CM Punk, how he exploded. And then there was a guy I became really tight with at that time period. His name was Danny Daniels. Danny Daniels had worked for ECW, had been around for a while already at that point. And then he opened up his own, or bought a promotion called AAW, which is still around and still a pretty big time independent promotion in the Chicago area. So, like I said, you start networking, you start meeting people. All of a sudden, we start making phone calls, right? And this thing that everybody says is impossible and can't happen, happened on June 14th, 2002. And we were the first ones to really break these walls between the promoters. And people were always like, how did you do this? I go, I talked to them and gave them an honest opinion, honest word of what was going to happen. Promised them I wouldn't make their people look bad, and we made it happen. So we ended up doing, that was our first one was in 02. We ran our last show in 06. And then my brother and I were still, like I said, very, very involved in wrestling. We continued to travel around the Midwest. My brother was doing shots in Detroit and stuff like that for one of the far hot cousins. All sorts of stuff. It was just an every weekend thing. We made really good friends around the Midwest. And I gotta share this story with you. So I became friendly with CM Punk. Punk's was kind of an interesting guy back then. He was very standoffish, kind of testy with people. And then when he saw that you weren't a dirtbag and you were cool, he was friendly with you and then became like a good friend to you. We used to talk on the phone, stuff like that. So I can't remember the exact date, but we had done some work with, we had brought Steve Carino in for a show, like 02, late 02. So Punk calls me one day. He goes, Brad, he goes, I got something for you if you're interested. I said, really? He goes, yeah, I'm going to be working with this new promotion out of Philadelphia, an independent promotion. He goes, we got some TV tapings coming up. He goes, we're looking for a ring announcer. He goes, do you want to come out and be our ring announcer? And I said, yeah, I'd be interested, Punk, you know. He goes, great. He goes, I'll have the guy give you a call, right? So at this time, Rick, I was also an apprentice pipe fitter at the time. I was serving an apprenticeship. And we made really good money. And we worked pretty much every weekend. I could still do the wrestling thing. You know, either I had school or I had to work on weekends because of the apprenticeship that I was in. But I was always able to make shows at night. It wasn't a problem. But if it was something during the day and I couldn't do it on Saturdays, I had school or I had work. So this guy calls me from Philadelphia, and I can't remember the guy's name. I remember the conversation, but I can't remember the guy's name. And he said, yeah, you know, we'd like to bring you out for this date, this date, this date, this date. He goes, we'll give you $50 a show. And what do you think? Do you want to come out? I said, well, are you offering any kind of trans or airfare or hotel or no, I figured you could just ride with Punk. I said, so there's no hotel, there's no, you could probably just ride out with Punk. Well, where's he staying? Well, I really don't know. And then all their recordings, their television recordings that they had lined up was on like Friday nights and Saturday mornings. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't make this happen right now. And the guy was kind of disappointed, and then so was Punk. You know, and Punk's like, Carino even put a word in for you, man. I'm like, I'm sorry, you know, I can't give up the payday and I can't miss school. And that turned out to be Ring of Honor. True story.
$50. I mean, I guess those early days for $50. I mean, you could have become a legend, you know?
Available on all streaming platforms. It's professional wrestling's greatest, largest, privately owned wrestling library. All the classic hits, flips, slams, and pins of yesteryear are on one place. It's Ultimate Classic Wrestling. Check out the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Mr. USA Tony Atlas, Tito Santana, Rick Martel, a who's who of professional wrestling's greatest spotlight stars ever to grace the squared circle, all in one place. Grab the best seat in the house for memories and mayhem on Ultimate Classic Wrestling.
It was early Ring of Honor, and then the names over those years that worked for us and we worked with that went on to become big names. Sean Davari, you know, he hit it big with the WWE. He won my tournament in 03. Ace Steel won our tournament when we started running regular shows as a promotion. CM Punk was our champion. I always joke around that CM Punk is still the reigning Interstate Promotions champion. But since 2006, but we had Ken Anderson, who wanted to become, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Kennedy, Austin Aries worked for us quite a bit, and just a bunch of people. And we never had any issues. I had minor issues running all these shows like twice, but really we never had any issues, and it was always just a handshake and an honesty thing, and just being straightforward with people. We ran our shows like you still would under the commission, where we had I would bring in, you know, a medic that I knew from the reserve, or we'd bring in a nurse. We'd do blood pressure checks. We would check people out health wise. We treated it like the real deal, like our shows were special, and we wanted them to feel that way. And then that was always the performance we got. So that was my experience with wrestling, with independent wrestling. I ended up getting deployed with the Army 2003 to 2004, and then again 2005 to 2006. So I lost a lot of time. I lost like 3 years with wrestling. And, you know, with the connections we made, with as big as some of those people got, I really think, you know, I might have stood a chance as a commentator or a ring announcer for somebody, just because I was a small guy, and it always looks good, you know, having somebody tall next to you holding a microphone for him, you know. Who knows, you know, wishful thinking, but you never know. But with the connections we made, anything was possible. So when that was done, when I got done with the military, I still did some sporadic shows. I don't want to say my desire for wrestling went away, I just started to really enjoy beer and women a lot more. And I preferred to spend my weekends focusing on those things too, and also making money working heavy overtime as a pipe fitter. So I've done a couple shows probably over the last 10 years. I kind of got the itch last year to promote again, started putting some feelers out there and trying to put things together with people. But one thing I would never do, my brother and I, we always made money when we ran our shows. I think our last show we broke even, and we said, that's it. We're not running again because we broke even. We never lost money. We always lined up sponsors. The envelopes were in the briefcase before the show started. Nobody was walking out of there without getting paid. That was never an issue. We always, we just ran a professional, tight operation. We worked enough indies to know how not to operate, right? Yeah. Everybody gets I'll get you next time. There's not going to be any next time.
I've had a few of those recently. So
yeah, it's indie-itis. That's the way it is out there. And some people are just scumbags. I remember I put a deposit on a ring one time. I was going to buy a ring, and this guy stole my $500 and ran. Right. What he didn't know was that every show he was booked on, I then showed up and got pieces of my money until it was paid back with some interest. I had another guy. You remember back then, Rick, like 20 years ago, hardly anybody made belts. Remember?
Yeah, now it's like a very common thing. There's a lot of different belt makers. You had to go to there's probably 3 or 4 people that were well known, and 2 of those guys are probably very legendary by today's standards. There's like Reggie Parks and the other guy. I'm trying to remember his name right now.
Yeah. We had for the Midwest here out of Illinois, we had a guy by the name of Ed Schumann. I don't know if that name rings a bell. Ed Schumann and I became friends. We used to talk on the phone all the time. I really liked Ed. Ed was a great guy. When TNA did the deal with the NWA, Ed started hitting hard with the NWA and setting up NWA promotions. I was this close to doing business with him as one of his NWA promotions. So long story short, when I was looking to buy a title belt for my promotion, I called Ed, and Ed told me who to use. And again, going back to scumbaggery with the wrestling business back then, I ordered this belt like 3 months out, right? And I ordered this beautiful green custom strap belt that was based off of it was very similar to the Hogan 86 belt, that style look. And so I ordered this. The guy tells me it's going to take me 6 weeks to make. I ordered it 3 months out. It's now 3 days before the show, and I don't have the belt. So all I can remember is the guy's name was Joe, and I think he was from Florida. So I call this guy up. I go, Joe, where's my belt? Well, I had some problems. It's not going to be done. I go, I have a show in 3 days, Joe. I need my belt. Well, you could do an angle where I go, it's a tournament, Joe. I got to have the belt. So long story short, my brother and I ran as a registered business. I mean, we didn't play around. We had insurance. We had everything. We ran as a professional outfit, professional business. So I said to this guy, Joe, I go, Joe, I'm not your typical 20-year-old indie running in my parents' backyard. I said, I'm a registered company. I said, I need my belt. I said, you and I have a contract. I have emails. You promised me my belt by this day. I'll have the belt overnighted to you tomorrow. and I got the belt. So that was, I could go on for hours with stories from pro wrestling, but it was my time with independent wrestling it was a very positive influence on wrestling. We got to meet a lot of great people and have a lot of fun and just learned a lot of what to do, what not to do in pro wrestling. I'm sure you remember in that era, everybody was kind of trying to be ECW. That was the rage.
There was a lot of people trying to revive it after it went out of business by hiring a lot of ECW alumni and continuing with the hardcore wrestling and stuff like that. And you would find a lot of the stuff like that. And it's especially with like the company names, you know what I mean? Like
everything was Extreme Hardcore Wrestling 9000.
Yes, something to like that. Even if you look at, and not to put this company down, because today they're doing great things, I think. But if you look back at early MLW when they first came around, it was very reminiscent of the ECW, especially with the talent and stuff.
Everybody was trying to do it. I was actually working an independent show one time on commentary when Sabu went into business for himself and opened up the referee. Now this is years. Yeah. This is years before the Hannibal thing where he did the crap in Texas that he did.
Yeah.
But I mean this really happened on the show where Sabu went into business for himself and opened up the referee. And I don't think Joe ever reffed after that. But so yeah, it was, that was, but you also had that time period too where there was a lot of people that still had passion for the Southern style wrestling, even technical wrestling. And it was just really cool shows back then because you got to see, the merge of all these different styles. And then a promotion that I've always had a high level of respect for, and people disagree with me, but we had a promotion in Chicago for many years called Windy City Pro Wrestling. And a guy by the name of Sam DeCero owned it. Sam DeCero was in a tag team. He was an AWA tag team champion, WWA tag team. Now, he wrestled in the AWA. He was a WWA tag team champion.
Gotcha.
When he retired early, like in his early 30s, he opened up Windy City Pro Wrestling with some partners. And they were the real deal. And I used to use, once I got the green light from Sam, again, just an open, candid, honest conversation with him, I got the chance to use a lot of his talent. And these guys were trained right. They were pros. They'd show up in dress clothes to your show. You never had any drama. You never had any problems with these guys. And then I had the opportunity where I got to work for them quite a bit too, doing ring announcing and backstage interviews and stuff like that. And what a professional operation. And it was kind of the end of an era, and I can't remember when they exactly finally closed their doors, but what a pleasure, to see that. And of course, that's where, a whole generation of wrestlers from the Chicago area came from. That's where Ace Steel came from. Danny Dominion came from there. Vic Capri came from there. Christopher Daniels came from there. I mean, it's just like a who's who of wrestling, especially in the 2000s, early 2000s, came from there. So it was, I had nothing but a blast. I had nothing but a positive experience. I've still maintained friendship with a lot of these people over the years. I'm sure if I saw CM Punk, he'd probably remember me. We'd probably shake hands and give each other a hug still. I'm sure he probably, that's how you saw all these people for all those years on every show. And it was a blast. And it's great to see that a lot of those people made it to the heights that they did, the big time that they did. Ace Steel did a bunch of tours for Pro Wrestling Noah. I mean, that's a big deal, especially in the early
it really is. Yeah.
2000s. Yeah. So
getting recognized internationally to me is a big deal. There's some kids around my area. I'm just like, one of them I know is eventually going to be picked up and go to Japan. And I talk about it all the time here because I just think that he just has a certain style that would fit in so well for like a juniors tournament or something to that effect over there. You know what I mean? Because that was like a big deal in Japan for a very long time. It was like the juniors tournaments.
Well, yeah, that was it. Because here in the States, everything was the land of the giants. Everybody wanted huge heavyweight wrestlers. And even All Japan was that way until they started opening up with their junior heavyweight division. And, but I mean, you go back 20 years and you look at even the structure of Japan, and it was tough. Nobody was working together. It was, everybody was their separate entity doing their own thing. It was tough for Gaijin, for foreigners to get in over there. It's almost, you had to know somebody, or you had to be just an outstanding talent. CM Punk was doing stuff over there with 0-1, but that was through Carino and Hashimoto and those guys. And that was always kind of the thing, is you had to have that connection. Now, I've just started following Japanese wrestling again the last 3 months or so.
Right.
And I'm trying to understand how things are structured and how it's laid out. But I've heard with indies now that guys are like paying their own way at going over there and wrestling for people. It's like not even necessarily an invite thing anymore. Like before, they paid for your flight. They put you up in hotels. You were on the tour with them. I'm hearing stuff now like indie guys are paying their own flights and paying for their own hotels and just working for promotions over there. Does that sound right, Rick?
To me, I don't know anything about that, but to
Yeah.
me, that's a little bit outlandish. You know what I mean? Because
That's what I've heard. And I mean,
as long as that
knows?
payday makes up for it, I mean, then maybe, you know what I mean? I wouldn't just go out there just for a simple payday. You know what I mean? Like
I hear you. That's an expensive flight.
absolutely, absolutely. So, you mentioned something about promotions never running into each other, never being booked on the same dates, back in the day. Back in the day. So here in Connecticut, there's always multiple shows per weekend. Basically, a lot of shows happen at the same time, which I find incredibly annoying at times because I'd like to go to probably, say, if there's 3 shows in the night, I'd like to go to all 3 and I have to pick and choose. Connecticut to me is a really like a big hotbed right now for professional wrestling, independent wrestling. There's probably 6 or so promotions running right now, and they're all amazing. They all have their certain flavor, you know what I mean? And a lot of the same guys work for the same promotions, and some of these guys are just amazing to see. And I just find it incredible that back in the day, sometimes that these companies would, you know, have the respect and not run on the same nights. That doesn't always happen anymore.
Yeah, it was a different time. And again, you know, that all fell apart sort of when the commission fell in Illinois.
Mhm.
And then you went from having 5 or 6 promotions to now you have 16. And then
Jeez,
companies
that's a lot.
like Windy City started loosening things up and letting people work for other people. But if you go back to like that old school territory mindset, it makes sense why they did things like that. You know, why am I going to have my champion, you know, win this Saturday night? Say I'm going to bring in King Kong Bundy. I'm going to have my champion go over count out over King Kong Bundy. And then next Saturday, he's going to take a loss in the 3rd match on somebody else's card.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It made sense when you think of things like that. And the other thing is back then, you know, you only had a handful of promotions. They were making money, and you know, they probably liked having commission because they didn't want anybody else to come in. So I can see both sides of it. You know, it's always good. It's always good to have different ingredients and spices in the soup. I agree. It's good to have that stuff, but I did always find it ridiculous. You know, like you'd have a guy that's the heavyweight champion in one promotion and he's losing in the 3rd match in another promotion, you know. But so I can see both ways.
My other question here, now that you mentioned it's about you guys running your shows, these super shows and tournaments and stuff. Is there video available?
You know what? We used to have eBay. I had an account on eBay and I used to sell. I could not keep these DVDs in stock. I mean, my brother and I, our company made the majority of our money. People from Japan were buying our DVDs up like mad. I still have original VHSs and some DVDs left. My brother's actually got them in his basement. I've had half of mine for years to start uploading them online. There are some matches. The guy that originally recorded some of our shows asked me about 10 years ago. He goes, he had like a weekly cable show, public access cable show. Used to call it something I think it was called On the Mat. And he would say, Brad, do you mind if I feature your matches? I go, no problem. And then he took all his On the Mats and he put them all on YouTube. So if you do a search for like I-8 Tournament of Champions, some of the matches will come up.
Right.
So, and there were some great bouts, but yeah, one of these days I'm going to get the originals from my brother and I'm going to look into getting them uploaded online. Hey, I see what the Savoldis are doing. I better get in on this.
Well, you know, the Savoldis now, let me break this to you now and everybody that's listening. This program is going to be featured on the Savoldi Network, the Ultimate Classic Wrestling Network, sometime in the fall. So we will be on there.
Super cool.
And they're going to be uploading a bunch of our backlog of legendary interviews and going into the future. So Brad Drake will be featured on the Savoldi Network.
I'm honored to be associated with those gentlemen. I appreciate what they've done for wrestling, and I think it's great that they're getting that old footage out there because they had a terrific independent promotion there.
I've told this before on this show, but the moment that I discovered that show, I was literally obsessed with it. It became my favorite promotion. And it's unfortunately at the time, the cable network that I had, because I discovered it while I was visiting my grandmother like 3 towns over, cable was only certain cable companies were only had jurisdiction in certain towns. It didn't hit my network until like another 2 years later. And then I was very excited. So when I discovered it, I was like, this was like you got to see names that you probably hadn't seen in years in WWE, or just names that you probably new names, and it's just I still go back, and now I am a proud subscriber of that network, and watching those old episodes, it's just amazing, dude. It's so cool.
It is. I mean, it's good stuff. I'm a huge fan of watching all those old 80s and even early 90s independent shows on YouTube and catching what I can. They all kind of followed that same basic TV format for cable TV back then, and it's cool. It's a really cool format, and these places were successful. They made money. Nowadays, and I hate to say this because I've been removed from it for so long, but like a lot of these promotions, like they're drawing like 70 people, and the guy's taking a bath, and people aren't getting paid, and you go back then, that's like they weren't even going to run unless they had a pre-sale of like 500, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a different time. It was a different business mentality. And not to say that there's not successful independents, because there are. I mean, there's hundreds of them in the country.
Yes, yeah. But back then, like a lot of those independents, they had TV, or if they had TV, but if they were running high school gyms or community centers or what have you, they were running with, say, like a sponsorship or a fundraiser or something to that effect. Savoldi's always ran with like a fundraiser, I believe, or a good portion of them, or with like a sponsorship. So there would be 500, 1,000 people in that small arena, or what have you, theater, whatever that they ran in. And it always looked great for TV. That was just awesome. And like I said, it was my favorite wrestling program on TV when I was younger. So did you grow up an AWA fan in your area? You had to be.
I was super lucky,
right?
And my brother and I talk about this all the time. Obviously I was growing up in the 80s, and my family, we had cable television, and my dad was a wrestling fan. So we used to get all the WWF pay-per-views. And then with cable, check this out. We got the AWA through ESPN, right? We had World Class was being syndicated. I can't remember what local station picked up World Class, but we got it. And then World Class was eventually on Sports Channel when Sports Channel first got started. And I think back then it was called Sports Vision. And that's what we were watching on that too. Then, of course, we got Crockett on Channel 50 for us, which was, TBS. And then we used to get the independent stuff. I can remember watching Windy City Pro Wrestling in the late 80s and early 90s. We got Music City Wrestling out of Memphis, Tennessee.
Right? Yeah.
I can remember catching on occasion Smoky Mountain, even in the early 90s. I forget, one of the stations picked it up late at night. But as like a young kid in like the early 80s, I can remember seeing all that stuff. So yeah, I definitely was an AWA fan. One thing I remember doing is I can remember my brother and I like laughing and making fun of the production quality of like the AWA or even World Class and like the studio wrestling. And I can remember us being like, you can hear people laughing in the background, and stuff like that. You look back at it now, studio wrestling was awesome. But I can remember watching all that stuff. And then we were convinced, like we were firmly convinced as kids, because I can remember we were watching World Class, the Dingo Warrior. He was with Gary Hart. And all of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, we see him in the WWF. And I'm like, they traded for him. My brother's like, they totally did. Who do you think they traded for him? Like, we're thinking this is like baseball or basketball or something where they were trading. It was the only thing we could come up with of how these wrestlers are going from one promotion to the other. I remember watching Rick Rude in in Crockett. He's the tag team champion. All of a sudden, the Rock and Roll Express is the tag team champions, and Rick Rude's in the WWF. And I'm like, oh man, they must have done like a future considerations deal, because I don't see anybody in Crockett from the WWF. Again, they're little kid mindset, So
we were come spoiled. Up with some incredible stuff when you're watching wrestling as a kid. I'm telling you.
And Rick, do you remember like the early WWF pay-per-views, how the screw-ups and stuff would still be on there?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I can remember watching. Can I swear, Rick? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
I can remember watching that interview where Gene Okerlund is interviewing Rick Rude, and the sign falls down, WrestleMania 4, and he goes, "Fuck it."
That was, I remember that. Every now and again that pops up on Instagram or TikTok or something like that, and it's just so comical to watch, because there's a whole bloopers reel on YouTube that somebody made with all mess ups, and it is just you want to laugh for like a good hour, go ahead and watch that thing. You're just gonna die laughing at like the most simple things. It's ridiculous.
I might have to. And my brother and I, we will still send each other like text messages and phone calls. We'll talk about it. SummerSlam 88 is my favorite pay-per-view of all time.
Me too.
I just listened to a podcast blasting SummerSlam 88. And I'm like, how dare you? Because SummerSlam 88 was awesome. And it was awesome because Billy Graham was so bad on commentary that it was good. I'll never forget. And if you watch it on the network, it's gone. He's doing the recap of when Warrior pins Honky Tonk Man. And he goes, and here we go, Gorilla Brother. Here it comes, man. He hits him with the big body slam. And Gorilla Monsoon goes, what a splash. To cover him, the whole thing. Or when he's talking about the powers of pain, he's like, Gorilla, what are you going to do if these two guys come over to your house to take out your daughters? I'd call the police, brother.
That is, I'm going to tell you why that's my favorite. I'll tell you that was it aired on a Monday night, I believe, back in the day. That pay-per-views were not just Sunday events or whatever. Now they're Saturdays, but they would air them on Mondays or Tuesdays or Wednesdays back in the day when they first started. That aired, I believe, on a Monday. We went to my uncle's house, watched it. And I just remember the British Bulldogs and the Rougeau brothers, and that became like one of my top matches of all time. Go to a 20-minute time limit. Two of my favorite tag teams going head to head. Of course, years later, when I read the freaking Dynamite Kid book and all that other stuff, you find out like they really so, and that situation got worse after that match.
They absolutely hated each other. Yes. Yeah. You know what? The British Bulldogs were my favorite tag team. And again, it's because Dynamite Kid was a smaller guy. I was a small guy. I can remember being in high school, lifting weights and doing everything I could to make my physique like the Dynamite Kid. Of course, I wasn't throwing 200 cc's in my butt cheek like Dynamite Kid was, so it was never going to happen. But that match, I mean, they were, and you learn all these years later, like how bad a physical shape Dynamite Kid was in. And you know what? The Rougeaus, the more I watch them and the more I watch Demolition, especially at my age and getting older and when I got involved in the inside of wrestling, like they are just so fundamentally sound. They're always in the right place. They never make a mistake. I don't know how the Rougeau brothers are not in the Hall of Fame, except for the fact that everybody hates Jacques Rougeau.
I don't understand why that is. Personally, I had him on this program earlier in the year. And to me, he was like the nicest guy in the world. So, and we still communicate like ever since he's been on this podcast. I sent him a couple DVDs and he's just like, man, you're a great guy. Thank you so much. So I love like Jacques.
He seems like a really humble, nice guy. I just, you hear the stories about him though, where he just irritated everybody back then. But anyway, they were just such a good team. So smooth.
How and the Rougeaus did not get the tag titles as a tag team, beyond me. That's
you know why, just like I know. It didn't get traded around back then. It had prestige. It meant something. If teams got it, they were going to hold it for a while unless there was an injury or something. I mean, think about it. The Bulldogs would have probably held on to that title for 2 or 3 years if Dynamite wouldn't have gotten hurt.
Probably.
It was right. And then look at that whole division. My brother and I talk about this all the time. Look at that tag division from 85 to 90. Like you
Fact.
cannot top that in any
Right.
era. It was
Yep.
unreal. Look at how good the Killer Bees were. I mean, that's
Mhm.
another team that was just so smooth, so good. You know, there's so many of them in that era.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, recently relaunched the WFIA,
Yeah,
and which I'm a proud member of. And according to this list over here, I'm a member of the board as well.
you're on the board with us, Rick.
I am, which I enjoy thoroughly. And it's amazing. You guys obviously do a bi-monthly newsletter, the WFN, the Wrestling Fans newsletter, which I've also contributed to on several occasions. And why don't you tell a little bit people about how you came to be head of this and how you brought it back to life, I should say.
Sure, absolutely. Like I said, I listen to a bunch of old school podcasts every day.
Mhm.
And I listen to Cornette a lot. I used to listen to Bruce Pritchard a lot before that show got kind of bad. But you hear these people, it's not the same anymore.
I've tried it like twice and I couldn't get into it at all. So
The originals, when it first started, it was really good. And then when he signed back with WWE, went straight downhill. Well, anyway, if you listen to their shows long enough, you hear them talk about like connections and friends that they made through wrestling through the WFIA in the 70s and into the 80s. So I started probably about a year ago. I'm like, I wonder if the WFIA is still around, you know? So I was like looking around and there wasn't a whole lot online about it. Dave Brzezinski, Supermouth, you know, he had posted some videos on YouTube of old conventions and stuff like that. But outside of that, there really was not a whole lot of information on the WFIA. So I went on eBay because I had heard that they had a Wrestling Fan News. So I started picking up like some old copies of Wrestling Fan News. There's actually a guy in Indiana that must have bought all of them, and you can get anything you want from him. Anyway, so I bought quite a few, and it was just a really cool concept. And it was when you hear the story and the background of the WFIA, how it was founded during the kayfabe era. I mean, Mr. Wilson is getting promoters in the kayfabe era to cooperate with them and host joint conventions for these promotions. And that's what it was. Every year they would go to a different territory. They'd spend a few days down there. They'd go to a show. They'd have a couple day convention, and all these people that were pen pals around the country and had their own fan clubs, they would all get together and have a great time for a few days and talk about and enjoy wrestling and meet people in the territory. And they gave out all these awards, and it was just this really cool concept. And if you listen to people like George Shire or Dave Brzezinski or Mike Lano or even Jim Cornette or even Bruce Pritchard, you know, these people were all members of the WFIA, and they just tell such warm and fond stories of the friendships and the conventions and all that. So again, going back to, you know, here we are 20 some years, 30 years later after the last existence, the last rendition of the WFIA. I was looking around trying to see if it was still in existence. There wasn't any social media with WFIA, nothing like that. So I thought, you know what? Something like this needs to make a comeback. So the first thing I did is I went on the Patent and Trademark Office and I go, let's see if anybody has the trademark for this logo, because I don't want to start something if somebody owns it and then end up in some trouble. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it had expired in like 2006, the trademark. So I made an investment and I filed for the trademark, and I got it. I got awarded the trademark. So then I started the Facebook page for it, the social media page for it. And immediately there was some interest. And of course, you know, you had a lot of negativity too of people are, who the hell is this guy? Who the hell is this guy stepping on our thing? And frankly, I don't blame them, because these people have such warm feelings and such fond memories from it. They don't want somebody tarnishing the legacy of the organization. So to, I don't want to say combat, but to, you know, put some water on those fires, when I receive negativity from these people, I'd say, hey, you know, can I have your phone number, or let me give you mine? Can we talk? And I want to learn more about the WFIA. I want to talk to you. I want to tell you what my plans are with it. And I had some really fantastic conversations with some really great people. I talked to Tom Burke. I talked to Dave Brzezinski. I talked to several others, and I just really learned about their passion for the WFIA. And so when we decided to do the first Wrestling Fan News, I went to great lengths to make it look exactly like the format, the way it's laid out, to make it look exactly like it would be if you opened it up in 1979 or 1983. And I think that respect and that approach won a lot of people over, and we continue to just explode on social media. I mean, we're nearing 700 people on our social media page since March. That's pretty darn good for a startup and not running any ads.
That is pretty good. I mean, so from what I understand, it's growing pretty well. Like you said, like just constantly, right? And how often are you getting notifications saying that people want to join? I'm sure all the information goes straight to you, correct?
Well, that one, we've left it open so you can just click, like, and then you're part of it. Every Saturday we do the welcome new members thing, and it's anywhere from 15 to 30 people every week that are joining.
Hey, that's good. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's done great. And we have plans too. We have plans to run a convention next year in September. It's most likely going to be an online convention. All this is going to take a long time to really build up and get the grassroots thing going. But it's been successful so far, and it'll continue being successful because we have people involved that care. And we continue with our meetings, with our committee meetings, and we have plans for the WFIA, and it will be a success because we're going to make it a success. And it's just, you can't hop in a time machine and go back. Wrestling has changed. People aren't sending each other handwritten letters anymore through the postal mail. It's electronic. So what we're trying to do, and I think we're doing it successfully so far, is we're transferring those same sentiments, the same feelings, the same sense of belonging and group of what they had in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we are bringing that now to the 21st century and 2023. And it's working. It's catching on, and we're learning as time goes on. We continue to improve. I think every issue of Wrestling Fan News has continued to improve, and I think it's a very quality, good publication.
Now we're switching from physical to just strictly digital, correct?
Yeah, we were offering a paper copy, but you know what? It's so expensive now to have stuff printed, and the price has gone up twice since we've been printing. And frankly, we haven't been moving very many of them. And I can understand that. It's the digital world now. People aren't buying newspapers that much anymore. So I made the decision to stop the print version, and we're just going to be digital from here on out.
I know a guy, the sinister minister of fear, who absolutely loves getting his digital copy, or he was getting the physical one. Every time a new one came out, he absolutely would highly praise it every time I spoke with him.
Yeah, I've gotten the chance to talk with him on the phone a few times. I think he's a terrific guy.
Absolutely.
And he's an original WFIA member. Yeah. And he appreciates what we're doing. And it's great to get that support from the original members. And I support what he's doing. I think it's fantastic. That guy is in great shape for his age. He's back working the indies. I think it's terrific. And he's a positive guy. And I think it's fantastic what he's doing.
He's recently made his comeback after 30 years of being away from the business.
Yes.
And that I find incredible. Now, I was put in touch with him through the Savoldis. He said, hey, they bought his library. They're uploading all his library, the old Chicago Challenge and the Bob Loose tapes and all that stuff that he owns. And they put him in touch with me and said, you should interview this guy, blah, blah, blah. So I did. And we went for 2 hours conversing. And I'd never, and it's no offense, Bob, but I had really never heard of this guy before. I knew nothing. And I had kind of checked my sources, people that would know oddball stuff out from the, say, WWA, which he had worked and out in that area, and they could barely help. But I'm telling you, as soon as that microphone went on, that's another guy that we were talking off air, that he just had amazing stories to tell as soon as we started conversing. And I learned so much in that 2 hours. It was amazing. And I've kept in touch with him pretty much weekly since.
Yeah, he's another one that's a link to that kayfabe era.
Yeah.
And, what wrestling really was.
Yeah.
And he's another guy that was very successful in wrestling. He was a smart businessman with wrestling. And I just think it's terrific that he's back on the scene and he's trying to help people out and he's trying to pass along, the knowledge to these people, because in my opinion, it seems like a lot of people need those lessons and need that knowledge.
Oh, in today's world, I see it as well. I work the indies as an announcer, as I stated before, and it's just some of these guys, you try to offer their advice, they'll be like, yeah, and then they won't deliver. But it's like, you're just here as your older self to try to help these kids. You know what I mean? Try to put on a better product. You don't want light tubes and dildos and all this other stuff involved in matches. So
yeah, I'm a firm believer in it's good to have variety on a show.
Mm-hmm.
I always enjoyed, the blow off to a feud, to be a violent match. I thought one of my favorite things in wrestling of all time is in Southern wrestling when you have the street fight. And they'd come out with the white elbow pads and knee pads over the jeans, and somebody was going to get opened up and there were cowboy boots, but it was a blow off to a feud. This would be for a feud that was going for 6 months. They'd wrestled each other 20 times already, or 30 times or 50 times, and it had a place. So, I have a hard time watching modern wrestling now. I can watch, I try to watch AEW every week. I think Collision's doing some good things right now. So I can safely say I probably appreciate 20% of modern pro wrestling. I've tried, like I said, I've gotten back into watching the Japanese stuff. I enjoy their work rate a lot better over there, although a lot of their stuff seems to become very WWE-ized. And it's just one thing I can't tolerate. I'll never be able to tolerate it. I can't do the intergender wrestling thing. It physically does not make any sense. And everybody understands that wrestling is entertainment, right? Everybody gets it. Everybody knows this. The cat's been out of the bag for 30 years. We all know this. However, the foundation, the basic principle of pro wrestling is you are supposed to be simulating an athletic contest. There's a reason that men and women are not fighting each other in MMA.
Yes.
That's all I'm going to say. So why do we have to have that in wrestling? I just watched some video of Tessa Blanchard, who's probably 125 pounds, German suplexing some 220-pound guy. It's not going to happen, ever.
I saw her and Brian Cage. Yeah, I saw her and Brian Cage wrestle each other, and I just thought it was absolutely atrocious. She won the Impact title from him, and I was like, it's complete garbage. Intergender wrestling, I'm just going to say it right here. It's complete garbage. I don't, one of the guys that co-hosts my weekly television program on with me, he tried to sell it to me and tried to convince me as to why it has its place in wrestling. And I'm just like, if there's an intergender match on the show, I'm not going to go to that show. It's nothing that I could get into. And I am a very old school traditional fan when it comes to professional wrestling. That's it. I love the old territories. That's it.
It just doesn't, intergender wrestling just does not make any sense.
Yes.
It's one thing when Kaufman was doing it as an angle to build heat against Lawler, makes that's cool. I mean, you watch that stuff, it was good stuff. It makes sense. But to actually try to take that as a serious thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Impact or one of these MLW or somebody, didn't they just have a guy and a girl as their tag team champions? Yeah. Something like that I just saw not too long ago.
I don't watch a lot of modern wrestling outside of shows I'm working, so I have no idea.
I saw that and I'm like, what the hell is this? You know? So I don't know. But it's good, it's good to have variety on shows. It's a healthy thing for shows, but I'm always going to be a fan of work rate, and I always enjoy those matches that look like a struggle. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about finishers, right? When the DDT happened, it was over. Remember?
Yes.
You got that circle in the air. He hit that thing. Done. Nobody was getting up from it. Nobody was getting up from Paul Orndorff's pile driver. It wasn't going to happen. Nobody was getting up from the Brainbusters spike pile driver.
Right.
That's all gone out the window now. Now a DDT is set up for something else 5 seconds later. It's everything has become just doing moves to each other instead of having a purpose of going to the move. There was a match I watched from one of the early Starcades. I think it was Mike Davis and Mike Graham. I can't remember if it was Starcade 83 or 85, and I may have Mike Davis confused with somebody else.
No, I think it was it Mike Davis and Denny Brown?
That's it. That's the match. There was another match that was really good with Mike Graham. If you watch that move or watch that match, the whole match looks like a struggle for control.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. I watched that stuff today and I still get glued into it. I watched I bought an eight DVD set of classics from All Japan. None of it's in English, none of it's written in English. If I don't know who it is, I don't know who it is, you know. But I watched this match and they had Jumbo Tsuruta against Stan Hansen. And they worked a cravat for 20 straight minutes. Stan Hansen had Tsuruta in a cravat, and they worked it for 20 straight minutes, did nothing, and had the place on fire when Tsuruta finally broke the cravat. I don't know if people don't have the attention span for this stuff anymore, or if they've just been brainwashed into thinking this lightning fast stuff is wrestling now. But I don't know. It's what I appreciate. It's what I'll always appreciate. And it's good to see when you see guys like CM Punk somewhat bringing that kind of style back a little bit. FTR is very good if they're in there with the right opponents. That's the stuff I like watching. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
But who knows what the appetite is for the fan nowadays.
There's a reason why WWE is making billions, right? So you know, and the traditional wrestling has gone down the wayside. It's because they did away with it and they just. But it's I've always been one of those people that less is more. The storytelling,
less is more. Yes,
less is more, and I've always said that the storytelling, the less is more tells a perfect story, and that's what gets your crowd, your asses off the seats and cheering and yelling. It's these high flying maneuvers where people going through tables constantly. Like now, it's like WWE just uses breakaway tables, and it's just like, how do you expect me to believe that all this equipment is just hidden under the ring at every show? Every single show. You think they hadn't learned in 30 years or 25 years, just to be like, maybe we shouldn't put those chairs and tables under there, because they keep using them. So
Rick, I could go another 20 years without ever seeing anybody go through a table.
Yeah. Same. Same.
Or every match somebody has to dive outside of the ring on somebody else.
Yep.
I can remember first seeing that stuff watching Japanese tapes in the mid 90s, and being like, wow. And now you watch it, the luster is completely away. You're taking a risk for no reason. If you're going to do it, one match, a show maybe or something, because you're right. It's all been overdone way too long, and there's no shock value to it anymore.
Now, I mainly go back to old school stuff, but there is some modern that I kind of watch. I do watch some of the United Wrestling Network stuff, which is, the old Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, which has become Championship Wrestling.
That's Marquez's work, right? Dave Marquez.
Correct. Yeah. Now they started they have a Memphis branch and now a Derby City branch or territory, whatever you want to call it. But see, they still run now. When the Derby City premiered, I was like, this is probably the best wrestling show. That week, it was literally the best wrestling show that I had watched because I was just like fully impressed. It was just typical old school style wrestling. It was amazing. So Marquez, I think, is doing a great job of keeping professional wrestling alive. The NWA struggles. As much as I still watch it, they struggle. And it's kind of aggravating at times to watch because, they have two clowns as a tag team wrestling. Literally two clowns. Actually, I think they're out your way, aren't they? The Brothers of Construction, if I remember correctly. Are they from Chicago?
I think so. The NWA does a lot of stuff here because Billy Corgan's from this area.
Right.
I don't want to bag on the NWA too badly because I got a lot of friends that work for them. Mm-hmm. Robert Anthony, who works for them, he's one of my first friends in pro wrestling. Yeah. I got a lot of respect for Brad Bradley, who's Jay Bradley now. There's a lot of people I know that work for them. However, I have to say that their product has gone way downhill since Aldis left. Yes. I was really excited when did Power start, Rick? Was that 18? Late 17?
I think it was 19. It was before the pandemic had kicked in fully. I could actually look it up while we're talking. It was before the pandemic had fully started.
It was a couple of years. Yeah. And I really enjoyed watching Power.
Yeah.
I was like, this reminds me exactly of Southern wrestling that we grew up with, the studio wrestling, the format. It was great. And then it just seems like after Aldis left, it just really went downhill.
Okay, so it says here that it was October 2019 that Power
it was 19. It was that late. Okay.
Yeah, and so they had only run, I think, 2, maybe 3 seasons. The seasons in professional wrestling, that's the thing that confuses me. But either way, it run 2 or 3 recording blocks or seasons, whatever you want to call it, before the pandemic had shut it down, and then they stopped recording. Then they were doing a lot of online content, and then they just disappeared, basically. But when they came back, it really suffered, I thought. And it was like pretty. I'm wearing an NWA shirt, okay, but I love the NWA, but a lot of the stuff they're doing in the modern era is aggravating to me and to an extent. And there was a lot of the problems with all this between him and Corgan not getting along, and that's why eventually all this left. So it's not the traditional wrestling and NWA that I grew up with. And I thought that 2019, when they were doing Power, I thought they were doing some amazing things. The talent that was there, the matches, it just reminded me of watching the old school NWA at the Techwood Drive Studios on TBS.
I agree. I was excited to watch it. It was fun. I was enjoying watching it. Cornette was brilliant on commentary.
Yes, absolutely.
And you know what? To this day, that whole thing where they ran him out of there or he quit or whatever, how the hell, if you thought that was going to be offensive, why didn't you just edit it out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I didn't think it was really that big of a deal.
It was pre-recorded. Yeah.
They said it was a racist joke, but it was not really a racist joke. But, some young neckbeard took offense to it. And then, they ended up having to re-edit that without that line. And then he just said, oh, forget this. I've had enough, and just left. After being spoken to about something a couple times, he said he's just there to have fun. You know what I mean? He wasn't there for the payday. He just wanted to make sure that the NWA was having good quality professional wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wish them the best of luck. I hope Corgan, finds a better direction and things go better. Yeah. It's just right now, it's just not for me. I'll watch stuff here and there. I think Tom Latimer's a superstar.
Absolutely.
I think he's got a couple real serious people there that are outstanding. I think Camille Kane is a terrific women's wrestler. I think she's a megastar waiting to happen. And I wish them luck, and I hope things, obviously they're doing something if they're continuing to run, right? Nobody's gonna hemorrhage money for years if something's not working out. You know?
I'm still gonna support them as much as I don't necessarily agree by everything, but I watched WWE for how many years and I didn't particularly care. So a lot of people say they don't watch and still care. But Brad, I want to thank you for spending the last hour with me. Thank you very much.
Sure, Rick.
How could people find Brad Drake?
It's simple. I got a website, braddrake.net. You can find me. You can also check out the Wrestling Fans International Association at the WFIA.org. Once again, that's the WFIA.org. You can also find us over on Facebook under facebook.com/WFIA 1969. And come join us. It's free to join. It's good stuff. You can hang out with Rick and I and all the others. Dave Dynasty. We got Tom Burks, one of our special advisors. We also have Dave Brzezinski with us as an advisor. George Shire is with us as an advisor. So we continue to grow and continue to get better. And join us. Have fun with us. And it's a good time.
Thank you. And make sure you go check out the WFIA.org and sign up. It's free, seriously. And you get this awesome newsletter in your inbox every month or every other month. And you can see our beautiful faces online as well. So go ahead, check it out. Thank you, everybody.